Hello friends, welcome to a new chapter today. In this chapter we are going to learn about the acute kidney injury. Okay, before we actually go into my notes, first we will learn about some important causes through the pictures. These are the pictures which are taken from Netter Atlas. Okay, so if you see, acute kidney injury is divided into three types. One, we have intrarenal type, second we have pre-renal type, and third we have post-renal type of acute kidney injury. I know this picture is not clear, but I think you can understand through the pictures itself. So in intrarenal type, first we have acute tubular necrosis, second we have acute interstitial nephrosis. Here acute tubular necrosis is the problem is in the tubules, there is necrosis of tubules. In acute interstitial nephritis, here the problem is not in the tubules or parenchyma, it is mainly present in the interstitial tissues. This acute interstitial nephritis can be due to the exposure to antibiotics, NSAIDs and proton pump inhibitors. Whereas this acute tubular necrosis, it can be due to renal ischemia or sepsis or exposure to aminoglycosides, radiocontrast agents, amphotericin B, calcineurin inhibitors, ethylene glycol, toluene and other nephrotoxic drugs. Then we have something called as thrombotic microangiopathy or disseminated intravascular coagulation are also associated here. And then we have malignant hypertension, which is an intrarenal cause of acute kidney injury. Even sometimes acute or progressive glomerulonephritis can lead to acute kidney disease. Allograft rejection and others can also lead to acute kidney injury. So these are the intrarenal causes, that is the causes are in the kidney. Then we have pre-renal. In pre-renal, the causes are not pertaining to kidney, but there is decreased, because of all these causes there is decreased blood flow to the kidney, and as a result there is acute kidney injury. So it can be due to excessive diuresis. Whenever there is diuresis, obviously the volume of the blood is lost. So as a result there is acute kidney injury, or it can be due to usage of NSAIDs, diarrhea or vomiting, hemorrhage, there is hepatorenal syndrome and poor cardiac output. See, in all these cases there is decreased blood volume, and as a result decreased blood reaching the kidney, causing pre-renal causes of acute kidney injury. Then what are post-renal? Post-renal can be anything which causes obstruction to urinary flow. Okay, anything which causes obstruction to urinary flow from the ureters to the prostate, anything can cause acute kidney injury. Then if you see, first we will see the possible urine sedimental findings in acute kidney injury. See, these are very important. So this is the hyaline casts. Okay, these hyaline casts are seen in normal individuals and also in pre-renal state. Where do you find this hyaline how are hyaline casts formed? They are formed by the aggregation of TAM-Hirsch mucoprotein, TAM-Hirschfeld mucoprotein in distal tubule, especially when there is low urine volume, especially when there is low urine flow. So these hyaline casts are seen in normal individuals and in pre-renal state, and these are formed by aggregation of TAM-Hirschfeld mucoprotein in distal tubule, especially when there is low urine flow. And then we have these what are these called? These are coarsely granular or waxy casts. So these are the waxy casts which you see, and here these are due to the breakdown of cellular casts. When the cellular casts break down, this will cause these waxy casts. These waxy casts have muddy brown pigmentation also. Okay, and they are non-specific indicators of intrarenal disease. Then we have, these are RBC casts. These are nothing but RBCs. These are formed by RBCs, and these are formed by those RBCs that enter the tubules at the glomerulus, and these RBC will aggregate along with TAM-Hirschfeld mucoprotein. What does they indicate? They indicate that there is glomerular disease. RBC casts indicate that there is glomerular disease. Then we have epithelial casts. So these are the epithelial casts which you see. In epithelial casts there is sloughed renal tubules along with TAM-Hirschfeld protein. Sorry, this one these are the epithelial casts. Here you see sloughed renal tubular cells along with Tom Hirschfeld protein in the distal tubule. It is not always, but it is seen in acute tubular necrosis. See, where is it seen is very important. Okay, we will see once again anyways. Then we have white blood cell casts. White blood cell casts, these are the white blood cell casts which are formed by the leukocytes that enter the tubule and aggregate with Tom Hirschfeld protein causes these white blood cell casts. These are seen in inflammatory conditions like acute interstitial nephritis, exudative glomerulonephritis, and severe pyelonephritis. Then we have red blood cells also. These are the red blood cells which reflect the glomerular disease, papillary necrosis, pyelonephritis, cystitis, urinary tract malignancies, urolithiasis, and others. These are white blood cells. Here you can see white blood cells separately. These white blood cells are seen in inflammatory conditions like cystitis, pyelonephritis, and acute interstitial nephritis. Then we have, these are oxalate crystals. So these oxalate crystals are mainly composed of calcium oxalate stones. Okay, these oxalate crystals can be seen in many causes. We will see in urolithiasis. Then these are uric acid crystals. See the difference. These are calcium oxalate crystals which are almost envelope shaped. These are uric acid crystals which are different shaped. Okay, these are seen in uric acid stones and also in tumor lysis syndrome. Why in tumor lysis syndrome? This is because in tumor lysis syndrome there will be increased tumor cell breakdown. So as a result there is increased breakdown of DNA, RNA and proteins. The breakdown of DNA and RNA leads to the production of uric acid. So there is exaggerated uric acid leading to uric acid stones. So these casts are very important. Let us also deal again. Where are they seen is important actually. If you see, these hyaline casts are seen in these hyaline casts are seen in normal individual. This is important. These hyaline casts are seen in normal individual and pre-renal state. Okay, then these waxy casts are seen in acute tubular necrosis. These waxy casts are seen in acute tubular necrosis. Then epithelial casts are also seen in acute tubular necrosis. Okay, epithelial cell casts are also seen in acute tubular necrosis. Then red blood cell casts obviously in glomerular disease. White blood cell casts are seen in those conditions where there is inflammation. Any type of inflammation can lead to this white blood cell casts. Inflammation of interstitium causes acute interstitial nephritis. Inflammation of glomerulus causes exudative glomerulonephritis. Inflammation of kidney can cause pyelonephritis. And in red blood cell casts are those where there is bleeding mainly. White blood cell casts again wherever there is inflammation, you see white blood cells. Okay, so these are important, especially you should remember them. Next, 1 minute. Okay, so this is the picture which you see here for pre-renal failure. We have first this is the picture of causes and pathophysiology and clinical features of acute tubular necrosis. So acute tubular necrosis is a renal cause of acute kidney failure. So here if you see causes of acute tubular necrosis, we have it can cause severe renal ischemia. It can be due to severe renal ischemia, hemorrhage or circulatory collapse, sepsis, or some of the toxic exposures like exogenous toxins, radiocontrast agents, antibiotics and antivirals, antifungals, amphotericin, antifungals like amphotericin or calcineurin inhibitors, ethylene glycol or toluene, or it can be due to endogenous toxins like myoglobin, hemoglobin, oxalates, uric acids, myeloma, light chain. Okay, all these will result in damage to the tubules. What is happening? How is there damage to the tubules? One, by the tubulo-glomerular feedback hypothesis. According to tubulo-glomerular feedback hypothesis, whenever there is damage to the tubular epithelium, this will reabsorb the filtered solutes. All the solutes which were filtered are reabsorbed by the damaged tubular epithelium. Macula densa also senses increased solute load. Okay, and as a result it causes arteriolar vasoconstriction resulting in decreased glomerular filtration. In tubuloglomerular feedback hypothesis, first we have damaged epithelial tubule. So here, in this we have damaged epithelial tubule, and as a result these damaged epithelial tubule cannot reabsorb the solutes. So what does it happen whenever the solutes are not reabsorbed? The solutes are present in the in the urine, and there is increased osmolarity of urine. This increased osmolarity of urine is sensed by this macula densa. And what does this macula densa do? This will send signals and releases the renin angiotensin pathway, activates renin angiotensin pathway, and as a result that causes release of aldosterone, which causes arteriolar vasoconstriction, and thus there is decreased GFR. There is one more which is called as tubular obstruction hypothesis. Here what happens is, whichever waste materials or tubular epithelial cells which are filtered in the kidney, all these will get together and they get aggregated, and they are form obstruction in the tubular in the tubule, leading to tubular obstruction. Whenever there is obstruction in the tubule, this leads to the back pressure. Okay, and this back pressure will go to the this back pressure first this is in the collecting duct, right? This back pressure will go to the distal convoluted tubule. From that the back pressure will go to the loop of Henle. From that the back pressure flows into the proximal convoluted tubule. Then back pressure goes into the Bowman's capsule. Because of that there is increased pressure in the Bowman's capsule is seen, increased hydrostatic pressure and increased osmotic pressure also, and as a result there is this filtration which is occurring will not occur. Okay, so this is one way how there is acute tubular injury which can occur. Then we have one more hypothesis which is called as back leak hypothesis. According to back leak hypothesis, these tubular epithelium which are there in the tubules, they get damaged, and because of these damaged tubular epithelium, this will lead to the paracellular reabsorption which are unregulated. So there is increased paracellular reabsorption can occur. Okay, all these can occur. Next, what is the features of acute tubular necrosis? See, histologically you see the tubular epithelial cells are flattened. Here histologically you see flattening of tubular epithelial cells. You see flattening of tubular epithelial cells. You see retraction or loss of see here also retraction or loss of apical brush border. Actually there should be apical brush border, but those apical brush border are not seen here. And there is granular cast formation in the tubule is seen, and also you see prominent nucleolus. You see cast formation in the tubule. You see tubular epithelial cell flattening, and retraction or loss of apical brush border cells are also seen. Then if you see, that is acute tubular necrosis findings. Again the same thing, you can see the retraction. This is the same thing again. You can see the retraction of epithelial borders. You can see tubular epithelial cell flattening with hypereosinophilia. You can see the sloughing of tubular epithelial cell. Mainly there are no apical borders. That is the main feature, and there will be flattening of epithelial tubular cells. Then now let us learn the proper acute kidney injury. Okay, so in the acute kidney injury, so there we have two important things in acute kidney injury, two important terms. One of it is acute kidney injury. Second, we have rapid progressive renal failure. Second is rapid progressive renal failure. In acute kidney injury, the damage to kidney occurs in hours or days, whereas in rapidly progressive renal failure, the damage to kidney occurs in days or weeks. Okay, in days to weeks the damage to kidney occurs. Now in the AKA, we have first definition of AKA. Definition of AKA is mainly proposed through Raffles criteria. So this Raffles criteria, Reiffel's criteria. So remember, this Reiffel's criteria is very important. What is Reiffel's criteria? It is RIFLE. That is, we have risk, R for risk, I for injury, F for failure, and E for FLL for loss, and E for end stage renal disease. Okay, that is seen in Reiffel's criteria. So this criteria is very important, which shows that which includes the following parameters. It includes serum creatinine, decreased GFR, and less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour of urine output. It includes mainly three criteria, that is serum creatinine, GFR, and urine output. So according to it, first risk. In risk, there is 1.5 fold increase in serum creatinine and 25% decrease in serum in GFR, that is glomerular filtration rate, and there is less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour decrease in urine output for 6 hours. That is called as risk. In injury, there is two-fold increase in serum creatinine, and there is decrease in GFR by 50%, and there is less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour decrease in urine output for 12 hours. Then in failure, the serum creatinine is threefold increase in serum creatinine is seen in failure, and there is decrease in GFR by 75% is seen in failure, and less than 0.3 ml per kg per hour for 24 hours, or you can see anuria for 12 hours. Then we classify it as failure. Then we have loss. In the loss, there is complete loss of kidney function for more than 4 weeks, or there can be end stage renal disease for more than 3 months. Okay, this includes the Reiffel's criteria. Then if we see, the next important thing is about the pathology. Okay, so in the pathology, we have divided the acute kidney injury into three types. We have pre-renal azotemia, renal azotemia, and post-renal azotemia. So first we will see pre-renal azotemia. I have already shown you the causes, but I will tell you again. So in the pre-renal azotemia, here the main reason, this R is reason, the main reason for pre-renal azotemia is failure of autoregulation. Here there is decreased blood volume enters the kidney, and as a result there is decreased filtration of kidney, and thus there is decreased GFR, leading to acute kidney injury. Okay, here all the etiology which can lead to hypovolemia, like diarrhea, vomiting, hemorrhage, burns, are the causes of acute kidney injury. All those which decrease the cardiac output, like conditions like congestive heart failure, myocardial infarction, pulmonary embolism, hypertension, pulmonary hypertension, in them there is decreased cardiac output. In congestive heart failure, the heart cannot pump the blood, and as a result there is decreased cardiac output. In myocardial infarction, there is infarction to the ventricle or atria, or a part of the ventricle or atria. That part cannot contract properly, and thus leading to decreased cardiac output. In pulmonary embolism, there is emboli which will obstruct the pulmonary artery or arteriole. So this will also decrease the cardiac output, because the blood from the lungs cannot drain easily into the left atrium, thus decreasing cardiac output. Then in hypertension or pulmonary hypertension, there is mainly the back pressure. After the pressure in the aorta is more when compared to ventricles. So as a result, ventricle has to pump hard to pump the blood from the ventricles to aorta. So this causes decrease in cardiac output. Then we have vasoconstriction of renal arteries. This vasoconstriction of renal arteries is from liver disease or norepinephrine, sepsis, or the carcinomas. All these can cause vasoconstriction of renal arteries. And there can be impaired renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. Whenever there is impaired renin-angiotensin aldosterone system, there is no proper regulation of GFR, and this impaired renin-angiotensin aldosterone system occurs with the help of ACE inhibitors or NSAIDs. Okay, these are the pre-renal azotemia. Next we have renal azotemia. In the renal azotemia, we have three types of renal azotemia. One, it can be vascular. That is, the problem here is in the vessels, or it can be glomerular, or it can be tubulo-interstitial. So it can be vascular, glomerular, or tubulo-interstitial. So first we will learn about the all the causes in detail. Okay, so if you see vessel abnormalities, vascular abnormalities, so first in the vascular abnormalities, it can be due to the dissection of the renal vessel, or from the vascular abnormalities in the renal vessel there can be thrombi or emboli formation in the renal vessel. Because of thrombi or emboli in the renal vessel, the blood cannot enter into the kidney properly because of this embolism or aneurysm, embolism or atherosclerotic plaque, and as a result this there is acute kidney injury. Second, it can occur due to tubular injury. In the tubular injury we have tubular necrosis. I have already shown you the causes of tubular necrosis. It can be due to drugs or endogenous causes. Drugs are exogenous causes. The exogenous causes or drugs include aminoglycoside, amphotericin B, vancomycin and acyclovir, whereas endogenous causes include hemolysis, rhabdomyolysis, tumor lysis syndrome or multiple myeloma. Then endogenous causes include hemolysis, rhabdomyolysis, tumor lysis syndrome and multiple myeloma. How does these cause tubular injury? In hemolysis there is breakdown of blood, and this blood releases hemoglobin. This hemoglobin will go and cause tubular injury, whereas in rhabdomyolysis there is breakdown of muscle cells, thus releasing myoglobin and potassium from the cells. Potassium leads to hyperkalemia. Myoglobin goes and it also forms, and this myoglobin also reaches the urinary tubule, reaches the urinary tubular lumen, and it combines with Tom Hirschfeld protein, and thus leading to obstruction. Then in tumor lysis syndrome there is lysis of cancer cells, and as a result there is formation of hyperuricemia and hyperkalemia and hypercalcemia, and thus causes tubular necrosis. In multiple myeloma there are gamma globulins which are seen, which will cause tubular injury. Then we have the glomerular causes. In the glomerular causes, first we have inflammation to the glomeruli, that is can be due to sepsis, glomerular nephritis or contrast agents, or it can be due to malignant hypertension. This also can cause due to ischemic injuries like thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura, hemolytic uremic syndrome, scleroderma and antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. Then acute tubulointerstitial disease can also be one of the cause for this acute tubular injury. In acute tubulointerstitial disease we have allergic interstitial nephritis caused by NSAIDs, leptospira and graft rejection. Then this is the way how this hemolysis, rhabdomyolysis, multiple myeloma, tumor necrosis syndrome causes obstruction to distal nephron. That is, hemolysis produces hemoglobin, rhabdomyolysis produces rhabdomyolysis produces myoglobin, multiple myeloma produces myeloma light chains. So these hemoglobin or myoglobin or myeloma light chain, all these will combine with Tom Hirschfeld protein, and thus this will cause obstruction to the distal nephron, and thus leading to the problem, that is acute kidney injury. Next we have sepsis. Sometimes sepsis can also cause this acute kidney injury. This sepsis can release cytokines and also reactive oxygen species. These cytokines will increase the nitric oxide synthase, thus causing arteriolar vasodilatation, whereas these cytokines also activate reactive oxygen species, thus leading to renal tubular injury. So these are the things which are seen here. Then we have ischemia associated acute kidney injury also. In this ischemia associated acute kidney injury, outer medulla is most vulnerable for ischemic damage. So in the cortex and medulla, outer medulla is most vulnerable to ischemic damage. Here in ischemic associated injury there is increased leukocyte and endothelial cell interaction in small vessels. This will lead to inflammation and local blood flow to metabolically active S3 segment. There will be inflammation and decreased blood flow to metabolically active S3 segment. Thus it results in ischemia associated with acute kidney injury. There is ischemia most commonly to outer medulla, that too most commonly to S3 segment of proximal tubule. Then the next cause is post-operative acute kidney injury. Here in post-operative acute kidney injury, ischemia associated with acute kidney injury is the most common complication which is seen in post-operative period. So in post-operative acute kidney injury, this includes mainly cardiac, if there is cardiac surgery with cardiopulmonary bypass, or vascular procedures with aortic cross clamping, or intraperitoneal procedures. See, in all these procedures, the main thing is there is the blood is actually goes through an artificial circuit. See, in cardiac surgery with cardiopulmonary bypass, the whole blood is connected to heart lung machine and it is filtered in heart lung machine, right? In vascular procedures associated with aortic cross clamping also, we will use some type of heart lung machine. Intraperitoneal procedures, in all these cases, the blood which is there in our body, it reaches artificial circuit in one way or the other. So as a result, this will lead to ischemia. Okay, and then we have one more type. The risk factors of this ischemia associated acute kidney injury include chronic kidney disease, old age, diabetes mellitus, chronic congestive heart failure, and nephrotoxins. And we have one more, which is acute kidney injury with atherosclerotic disease. In this acute kidney injury with atherosclerotic disease, we can see here there is percutaneous catheterization of aorta due to cholesterol crystal embolization. Here there is catheterization of aorta due to cholesterol crystal embolization, which result in acute kidney injury. Then I have already told you that some conditions like burns and pericardium, these will cause hypovolemia and decreased cardiac output. Because of decreased cardiac output, they can cause pre-renal cardiac failure, and sometimes whenever there is decreased cardiac output, it will increase the neurohormonal activation, and this increased neurohormonal activation will increase sepsis formation and acute lung injury as the side effects. Okay, then we have one more thing, which is contrast agents. So if you see in the contrast agents, we have iodinated contrast agent in cardiovascular system and contraindicated imaging in acute kidney injury. So if you see, all these will lead to acute kidney injury. Whenever we use iodinated contrast in CVS or CT imaging, any type of CT, especially CACT imaging, we will use contrast agents. So those can lead to acute kidney injury. But normally this acute kidney injury is not seen, but this is seen especially in those individuals where there is already there is presence of renal compromise. So now if you think, now presently the patient has been exposed to any type of iodinated contrast agent, now immediately he does not develop symptoms. It takes nearly 24 to 48 hours for the creatinine to rise. Once there is exposure to contrast agent, within 24 to 48 hours, the serum creatinine will rise. This serum creatinine will start raising and it peaks in around 3 to 5 days. Okay, and then it decreases in a week time. So it will increase, the serum creatinine will increase, it will peak in 3 to 5 days, and then this serum creatinine will decreases in a week. Okay, so what is the iodinated contrast? We have high dose gadolinium contrast, which is for MRI, and oral Na3PO4 solution can be used as bowel purgatives. Okay, either high dose gadolinium contrast or oral Na3PO4 can be used as contrasts, and both these can cause contrast related nephropathy. And this, why does this occur? This acute kidney injury due to contrast agents mainly occur due to hypoxia and cytotoxic damage. Okay, in contrast agents, in order to prevent it, we should use isotonic saline. Here we can use isotonic saline and NaHCO3 can be used. Okay, here we can use isotonic saline NaHCO3 can be used, but these isotonic saline or NaHCO3 should be started at least 1 hour and continued thereafter for 3 to 6 hours afterwards. Okay, it should be started at least 1 hour before and continued for 3 to 6 hours afterwards. Okay, then if you see, the next thing which we have is hypoalbuminemia. Hypoalbuminemia also causes increased risk of nephrotoxin associated acute kidney injury. There are some diseases of vasculature also which can lead to acute kidney injury, like APLA syndrome, that is antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, scleroderma, atherosclerotic disease, radiation nephritis, thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura or hemolytic uremic syndrome, and malignant nephrosclerosis. Then if you see, some drugs can also cause this acute kidney injury. Among the drugs which cause acute kidney injury, we have aminoglycoside. Aminoglycoside accumulates in renal cortex and within 5 to 7 days it causes acute kidney injury. Amphotericin B. Amphotericin B causes vascular renal vasoconstriction and it can cause direct tubular toxicity. Then vancomycin or acyclovir will precipitate in renal tubules, causing tubular obstruction. Then drugs like foscarnet, pentamidine and cidofovir, these will cause tubular toxicity. Then we have penicillins, cephalosporins, chloroquinolones, sulfonamides and rifampicin. All these will cause acute interstitial nephritis. Drugs like cisplatin and carboplatin can accumulate in proximal convoluted tubule, leading to necrosis and apoptosis. Then drugs like ifosfamide will reach the hemorrhagic cystitis and tubular toxicity. Type 2 renal tubular acidosis is seen due to ifosfamide. Then we have anti-angiogenic agents like bevacizumab causes injury to the glomerular microvasculature. Drugs like mitomycin C and gemcitabine causes thrombotic microangiopathy. So these are the different drugs which are involved in renal acute kidney injury. There are also some toxins which are involved in acute kidney injury. The toxins include, first we have ethylene glycol. Ethylene glycol can be in the form of oxalic acid, glutaraldehyde or glyoxylate. It causes, all these will cause tubular injury. Then the drugs like melamine contamination of foodstuffs. This melamine contamination of foodstuffs is also associated with tubular injury. There is aristolochic acid. Aristolochic acid is from Chinese herbs. It is taken from Chinese herbs and it causes Chinese herb nephropathy, or also called as Balkan's nephropathy. So all these are the renal causes of acute kidney injury. Then we have to see about the post-renal causes of acute kidney injury. So if you see, in the post-renal causes of acute kidney injury, this includes all those causes which will cause obstruction of the okay. These include urinary stones, bladder stones, benign prostatic hyperplasia or prostatic carcinoma, tumors, urothelial tumors, urethral strictures, extraperitoneal fibrosis, urethral stones. So all these are the post-renal causes. So if you see clinical features will vary based on the phase of this injury. So if you see, in the initiation phase, that is in the first 36 hours, in the first 36 hours, urine output begins to reduce. Then in the maintenance phase, second phase, which is maintenance, or in oliguric phase, that is in 1 to 3 weeks, slowly there is decreased GFR. So this decreased GFR will increase the fluid overload. Okay, this increased fluid overload, so because there is increased fluid overload, there is increased water when compared to sodium. So this leads to relative hyponatremia. Okay, and there is decreased electrolyte excretion. So because of decreased electrolyte excretion, other electrolytes like potassium, phosphate, magnesium, uric acid, blood urea nitrogen, all these will increase. So there is hyperkalemia, hyperphosphatemia, hypermagnesemia, increased uric acid and increased blood urea nitrogen is seen. And sometimes, but even here there is increased calcium, but this calcium will combine with the phosphate and it forms calcium phosphate, and as a result the serum calcium level will decrease. Okay, then we have one more which is called as stage of uremic complications. If you see, stage of uremic complications is so this stage is called as stage of uremic complications. So what do you see in this stage of uremic complications? You see hyponatremia, hyperkalemia, hyperphosphatemia, hypermagnesemia, increased uric acid, that is hyperuricemia, hyper or increased blood urea nitrogen. Okay, in this case this is the stage when you will have to start dialysis. Hemodialysis is started in this maintenance or oliguric phase. Then we have the third phase, which is important, is here this third phase is from more than 2 weeks. This third phase is done for more than 2 weeks, and in this third phase you see loss of water and electrolytes are seen. Okay, here in third phase the oliguric phase is done, and as a result the tubule starts to regain its function, and there is loss of all electrolytes and water is seen. So all electrolytes are reversed. So there is hypokalemia, there is decreased potassium. Okay, hypokalemia, hypophosphatemia. After diuresis there is hypomagnesemia, hypophosphatemia, hypocalcemia, hypouricemia, that is decreased uric acid in blood is seen. Here if you see, the water is far less when compared to sodium, and therefore in this stage there is increased sodium, that is there is hypernatremia is associated in this stage. So if you see here in initiation phase we have urine output will begin to reduce. In maintenance phase there is even still more decreased urine output, and all the electrolytes will increase except sodium. Whereas in diuretic phase, after 2 weeks all the electrolytes will decrease because all the water is lost and electrolytes are also lost, but there is increased sodium, okay, is seen. Then how are you going to diagnose this acute tubular injury, acute kidney injury? Acute kidney injury is diagnosed by, see here we have something called as oliguria. So when do you call it as oliguria? Oliguria is decrease whenever there is less than 400 milliliters of urine per 24 hours, then we call it as oliguria. And in this acute kidney injury you see presence of red and brown colored urine. Okay, this red brown urine is centrifuged and sometimes the color persists, and this leads to something called as pigment nephropathy. Okay, this leads to pigment nephropathy. Sometimes there is proteinuria also. This proteinuria is actually mild, that is less than 1 gram per deciliter. You will see hyaline casts present in this acute kidney injury, and there are muddy brown granular casts are also seen. In glomerular nephritis you will see red cell casts. In interstitial nephritis you will see WBC casts. In interstitial nephritis you see WBC casts. In oxalate crystals are seen in ethylene glycol toxicity. Uric acid crystals are seen in urine in tumor lysis syndrome. I have already shown you all these crystals if you remember. Okay, then we have something called as two types, that is pre-renal and renal. We will learn both of them. Okay, so what do you see in pre-renal and what do you see in renal? This is actually important. Okay, so in pre-renal we have the fractional sodium excretion is less than 1. Remember, in pre-renal, see, let me tell you, in pre-renal the main problem here is decreased GFR, right? Because of hypovolemia there is decreased GFR. That is the main problem in pre-renal. And in renal there is some intrinsic problem in the tubules. Okay, in the tubules or in the glomerulus there is some problem. Okay, so in pre-renal this is the mechanism that is happening. Okay, in pre-renal there is decreased volume, there is hypovolemia, right? Because of hypovolemia there is decreased GFR, there is decreased GFR. This GFR will activate renin-angiotensin system. Okay, this renin-angiotensin system will activate adrenals. The adrenals will produce aldosterone. Aldosterone causes sodium reabsorption and potassium secretion, and along with sodium even water and urea also get reabsorbed. So as a result, because of reabsorption, the amount of sodium that is excreted is less. There is increased blood urea nitrogen to creatinine ratio. Okay, there is decreased electrolytes or everything that are going to the through the urine are decreased. So see the changes, it's almost similar. See, I said that there is sodium reabsorption. Because of sodium reabsorption, the sodium excretion is less. So fractional sodium excretion is less than 1%. Fractional sodium excretion is urine sodium by plasma sodium into plasma creatinine by urinary creatinine into 100. So this fractional sodium excretion is less than 1% in renal. Okay, then I said the sodium is reabsorbed, so there is less sodium in urine. So obviously the sodium in urine is less than 20 milli equivalent per liter, right? Then I have also said that along with sodium, water and urea also get reabsorbed. Because of the water getting reabsorbed, there is less water in the urine. So that means there is more osmolarity of the urine. So urine osmolarity is more than 500 milliosmoles per kg. Then I said that along with urine along with water, urea get reabsorbed, and also blood urea nitrogen also gets reabsorbed. So as a result, in urine blood urea nitrogen is reabsorbed but not creatinine, right? So creatinine is not reabsorbed. There is blood urea nitrogen is mainly reabsorbed, whereas creatinine is not reabsorbed, and as a result the urine creatinine is more when compared to plasma creatinine. So that means urine is to plasma creatinine ratio is 440:1. Okay, I said the urea is reabsorbed, so as a result blood urea in the blood is more when compared to creatinine, so that is more than 20:1. Then there is specific urine specific gravity is more than 1 because it is hyperosmolar. There is increased osmolarity, and even urine failure index is less than 1, and urinary pH here is acidic. Okay, so these are the different things which you see in pre-renal type of acute kidney injury. Then we will have to see how renal type of acute kidney injury presents. So in renal type of acute kidney injury, the problem is in the kidney. So because the problem is in the kidney cannot filter. So as a result, the reabsorption and secretion in the kidney is impaired. Okay, so it's correct, exact opposite of renal. In pre-renal you will see that there is proper absorption of sodium, water and urea, all are absorbed due to aldosterone. But in renal all are impaired, all absorption and secretion is impaired. So as a result, there is no absorption of urea or water or sodium. So all these will go in urine. That is one important thing. So if you see here in renal the fractional sodium excretion is more than 2% because there is no reabsorption of, because the tubular cells are damaged, there is no reabsorption of sodium or potassium or water, there is no reabsorption of secretion. So as a result, the fractional urine sodium concentration excretion will be more than 2%. Then sodium in urine, because it is not reabsorbed, sodium in urine is more, so it is more than 40 milli equivalent per liter. Then because of the more water and more sodium being excreted in the urine osmolarity is less, because water is also not reabsorbed, so there is less urine osmolarity, that is less than 350 milliosmoles per kg. Then urine plasma creatinine ratio is also less, because here the creatinine is also not secreted properly, so it is less than 20:1. Blood urea nitrogen to creatinine ratio is less than 15:1, because blood urea nitrogen is not reabsorbed in this case, so blood urea nitrogen to creatinine ratio is less than 15:1. Then urine specific gravity is approximately equal to 1.010. Renal failure index is more than 1, and if you see urinary pH, it is mainly alkaline. Okay, so these are the important things. When the patient is on dialysis, and normally this, among all these, if you see, this fractional sodium concentration has the best value, right? But if think that, assume that if the patient is on dialysis, what happens? What should you do? If the patient is on dialysis, then this fractional excretion of sodium is of no value, and in that case we will have to do fractional urea by fractional excretion of urea, or fractional excretion of uric acid should be preferred. Okay, this is about the renal. So what do you see in finally post renal? In post renal, if you see, there is obstruction, right? In the beginning there is obstruction which is similar to pre-renal. Later, after a few days or few weeks, you will see the epithelial damage occurring. So as a result, in post-renal, initially it occurs as pre-renal, and later it mimics renal. Okay, then we will see the investigations that we have to do. The first investigation is, we can do complete blood count. Okay, and in the complete blood count, that is CBC, you see hemolysis or multiple myeloma. Actually, this complete blood count will depend on the type of or the cause which is associated with acute kidney injury. So if you see in complete blood picture, it can be seen hemolysis, or the pictures of multiple myeloma can be seen. And sometimes if it is associated with thrombotic microangiopathy, we can see thrombocytopenia, decreased LDH, decreased haptoglobin, and cystocytes of RBC are also seen. And sometimes hyperkalemia, hyperphosphatemia, and hypocalcemia are seen. Then if you see rhabdomyolysis, in rhabdomyolysis there is increased potassium, decreased calcium, increased creatinine phosphate, increased serum uric acid are seen. In tumor lysis syndrome, because of the breakdown of the tumor, there is increased serum uric acid. There is increased potassium, because intracellularly potassium ion is more. When the cell breaks, the potassium from the cell enters the blood, and thus it causes increased potassium. Okay, in the tumor lysis syndrome, there is decreased calcium also, and tumor lysis syndrome is not much related to muscle, so there is normal or mild increase in creatinine phosphokinase. Then if you see ethylene glycol poisoning, you will have increased anion gap and osmolar gap are seen in ethylene glycol poisoning. In oxalate crystalluria, you see increased anion gap and osmolar gap associated with oxalate crystalluria. Then in multiple myeloma, we see low anion gap is seen because of the presence of unmeasured cationic proteins. Okay, then if there is any glomerulonephritis or vasculitis, then you will have to test for anti-nuclear antibodies or anti-nuclear cytoplasmic antibodies, or you will have to test for decreased complement proteins. Then in the ultrasound features of radiology, you will see the features of the underlying disease. For example, if there is hydronephrosis, if there is stone, if there is any urethral stricture, prostate hyperplasia, prostatic carcinoma, any tumor which is compressing the ureter, all these can be seen either in ultrasound or X-ray, but it is dependent upon the type of lesion, that is primitive lesion, that the kidney has. Then we can do this kidney biopsy. Actually, this kidney biopsy is diagnostic and definitive diagnostic, and it gives prognostic information. Okay, that is kidney biopsy. Then we have some biomarkers. Okay, so what are the biomarkers in kidney injury? We have different types of biomarkers. So first we have kidney injury molecule 1, that is KIM1. This is type 1 transmembrane protein in PCT injured by ischemia or nephrotoxins. Then we have neutrophil gelatinase associated lipocalcin or lipocalcin 2 or siderocalcin. Alanine aminotransferase, alkaline phosphatase, alpha glutathione S transferase, gamma glutamyl transpeptidase, N acetyl beta D glucosaminidase, beta 2 microglobulin, alpha 1 microglobulin, retinol binding protein, cystatin C, microalbumin, clusterin, neutrophil gelatinase associated lipocalcin, interleukin 18, cysteine rich protein, osteopontin, liver fatty acid binding protein, sodium hydrogen exchanger form. So if you see, all these are the markers of kidney injury, biomarkers of kidney injury. I know it's difficult to remember, but at least try to remember as many as possible. Okay, next we have KDIGO classification of kidney injury. According to KDIGO classification of kidney injury, the kidney injury can be divided into 3 major stages. So if you see, in the stage 1, there is presence of creatinine, that is 1.5 to 1.9 times the baseline, or there is presence of urine output, that is less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour for 6 to 12 hours. In stage 2, there can be creatinine increase in 2 to 2.9 times the baseline, or urine output can be less than 0.5 milliliters per kg per hour for 12 to 24 hours. In stage 3, serum creatinine can be more than 3 times the baseline, or it can be more than 4 milligram per deciliter, requiring dialysis. Urine output, it might show N-urea for a period of 12 hours. So it is almost similar to the Reifel criteria, but this KDIGO criteria is also asked once, so I just mentioned it. Then what are the complications of acute kidney injury? So complications of acute kidney injury include, this is mainly because of this acute kidney injury complications are mainly because of the problem, increased blood urea nitrogen and increased creatinine. So that will lead to a symptom of uricemia. It can cause uremic symptoms. Okay, it can lead to either hypervolemia or hypovolemia. How can it cause both hypervolemia or hypovolemia? It can be because in the beginning, if you see, whenever there is tubular obstruction, okay, there is impaired salt and water excretion, and as a result there is a tubular obstruction, so there is no filtration of fluid from the extracellular fluid to the from the glomerulus. There is no filtration of fluid from the glomerulus into the tubule. So as a result, there is increased blood volume causing hypervolemia, and sometimes it can also cause hypovolemia. Okay, this acute kidney injury can also cause acute lung injury. How does that occur? Whenever there is impaired salt and water excretion, there is expansion of extracellular fluid volume occurs. So because of that, this expansion of extracellular fluid volume will cause weight gain, dependent edema. It increases internal jugular venous pressure and pulmonary edema, and finally leading to acute kidney injury. This acute kidney injury can also lead to cause of polyuria as complication. Okay, it can cause hyponatremia. This hyponatremia can lead to seizures. It can lead to hypokalemia. Hypokalemia can lead to arrhythmic manifestations. It can cause metabolic acidosis. Okay, other electrolyte imbalances like hyperphosphatemia, hypocalcemia are also seen. Acute kidney injury is also associated with bleeding and anemia. It is associated with infections, cardiac complication, malnutrition. So these are the many side effects, complications of acute kidney injury. Then what is the treatment of acute kidney injury? Treatment of acute kidney injury include, first we will have to treat the pre-renal azotemia. So pre-renal azotemia, first it depends upon pre-renal, intrinsic and renal, post-renal. Okay, first we will see pre-renal azotemia. In this, why is there pre-renal azotemia? Pre-renal azotemia is mainly due to the hypovolemia, right? There is decreased fluid, like because of decreased fluid intake, that decreased fluid intake will lead to decreased fluid intake, or it can be due to decreased fluid intake or burns, diarrhea, any cause, but all those causes are decreased cardiac output like congestive heart failure, myocardial infarction. So all these will decrease the blood volume. So if in any case, if you increase the blood volume, then obviously the blood reaches the kidney and thus increases GFR. So in cases like burns, GI loss like vomiting, diarrhea, or hypovolemia or pancreatitis, you can use fluid replacement. In this fluid replacement, we can generally replace isotonic crystalloid or colloid. That is, if it's isotonic, you can use 0.9% normal saline, or if it is hypotonic, then you can use 0.45% of normal saline. Okay. Yeah, if it's hypotonic crystalline, if it's hypotonic solution, then we can use 0.45% of normal saline is used. If we have metabolic acidosis, then we can use dextrose water with 150 milli equivalent of sodium bicarbonate can be used for pre-renal azotemia for fluid replacement. Then what about renal? The next is about renal. In the renal, if we have rhabdomyolysis, then you will have to do forced alkaline diuresis is indicated if there is rhabdomyolysis, and if there is if there is tumor lysis syndrome, then allopurinol or rasburicase is indicated. In post-renal acute kidney injury, we should treat the cause. Then what about the supportive measures? Supportive measures mainly depend upon the type of the injury that the kidney has. Based on that, we will have to treat it. So if there is volume overload, if in any case there is volume overload, then we can give salt water restriction, diuretics or ultrafiltration can be done. If there is hyponatremia, in hyponatremia we can restrict the free water intake and also minimize the hyponatremia by giving hypotonic IV solution. Then if there is hyperkalemia, don't forget, if there is hyperkalemia, you should always treat the hyperkalemia. If there is hyperkalemia, always treat the hyperkalemia. How will you treat the hyperkalemia? That is, first you should discontinue the potassium sparing diuretics or angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors, angiotensin receptor blockers or NSAIDs. Why should you discontinue them? Because all these will lead to increased potassium. They have the side effect of increased potassium. So in order to decrease the potassium in hyperkalemia conditions, we should discontinue potassium sparing diuretics, angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors, angiotensin receptor blockers and NSAIDs. Then we can give loop diuretics, because loop diuretics will increase the water loss, and you can give potassium binding resin like sodium polystyrene sulfate. Sodium polystyrene sulfonate can be given, or you can give insulin and glucose. Insulin with glucose can also be given, because this insulin causes sodium entry into the cells and thus decreases the it causes potassium entry into the cells and thus decreases the potassium level in the blood. So insulin 10 units regular and glucose will cause entry of potassium into the cells, and as a result it decreases potassium in the cells. And there is also inhaled beta agonist like salbutamol. It also causes potassium entry into the cells, and you can also give calcium glutamate or calcium chloride. Okay, so these are the different drugs which can be given for hyperkalemia. Then we have metabolic acidosis. In the for metabolic acidosis, we can give sodium bicarbonate can be given to counteract the metabolic acidosis. Then we have hyperphosphatemia. For hyperphosphatemia, we will have to restrict the dietary potassium intake. Okay, and you can give potassium binding agents like calcium acetate, sevelamer hydrogen chloride, sevelamer HCl, or ALOH taken thrice can be taken with meals. These are potassium binding agents. Then if there is hypokalemia, then we can give supplementation of calcium carbonate and calcium calcium gluconate. If there is hypermagnesemia, then we should discontinue the magnesium containing antacids. Then we will have to also give sufficient nutrition. Okay, so even after doing this supportive care, we will have to do dialysis, as I have said, in the clinical stage 2. In the clinical stage 2, where there is uremia, that is azotemia, that is indicative of dialysis. Similarly, you should do dialysis in many conditions, in many reasons in acute kidney injury. So we will learn the indications of dialysis. Indications of dialysis can be divided into biochemical indications of dialysis and clinical indications of dialysis. In biochemical indications of dialysis, it can be due to one, refractory hyperkalemia, that is potassium more than 6.5 milli equivalent per liter, or it can be due to metabolic acidosis where pH is less than 7, and tumor lysis syndrome. But dialysis should also be done due to clinical causes like stage 3 absolute anuria for a period of 12 hours, multi-organ failure, or volume overload and uremic complications. Then small solutes are removed across the semi-permeable membrane down the concentration gradient, that is called as diffusive clearance. Along the concentrated gradient, if you do, that is diffusive clearance, and if it is done along the plasma water, then we call it as convective clearance. We have two types of dialysis, peritoneal dialysis and hemodialysis. So this is about everything about acute kidney injury. So thank you guys for watching my lecture. In the next class we will learn about chronic kidney injury. Thank you.